Hello! I too made a manga for a contest. I've always loved reading manga, so when I saw Kadokawa's Wordless Manga Contest get announced, I thought, now is the time to finally create my own. And what better timing than when I'm currently unemployed? And not gonna lie, the prize pool played a significant factor into why I wanted to enter as well. I got student loans to pay, and I thought if I had a small chance to win at minimum 3,000 USD, which is 4,300 Canadian dollars, well, I had to give it a shot. So here we are. I'm going to share my process, and you can look at the full manga at the very end. So with a deadline of February 28th, I started the day after New Year's, and I finished around early February. So it took me about 5 to 6 weeks to finish this manga. I wanted to give myself plenty of time, and I'm really glad I did, because before starting, I watched a bunch of other YouTube videos on how people were making their mangas for other competitions. And the amount of people that I saw that were cramming and rushing to meet the deadlines was crazy. Please pace yourselves, and the process will be so much more enjoyable and your work will be much stronger. I gave myself the goal of finishing 2 pages a day. Some days I would draw a little more, some days I would draw a little less, but the takeaway I want to give here is to please pace yourself and be consistent for any project you tackle in the future. But anyways, alright, let's move on. The contest is wordless, which means no dialogue, speech bubbles, or text, or anything. It has to be all visuals, so the story has to be conveyed through other means such as character actions or panel compositions. So I created myself a page of Milo notes, and I literally wrote out what happens in the story. And something that really helped me is figuring out the who, what, when, where, and why. Now that sounds elementary, but it really does help, especially the why. You know, why is any of this happening? Why should anybody care? And at this point, I want to emphasize that I have not drawn a single thing. I was only concerned about the story structure. So with the rough story structure figured out, I started creating concept art for myself. The goal here was to explore and test things, but most importantly to figure out the designs of the most important things in the story. Everything drawn here is not meant to appear in the final product at all, and they certainly aren't meant to look good either. Something I also did was to gather references and inspiration, which I compiled on PureRef, a very handy tool which I'm sure you've heard many artists talk about. Alright, so what's next? Did I start drawing yet? Nope. The next step for me was to create a storyboard, and I'm not gonna lie, I struggled a bit during this stage. I found it difficult to translate a bunch of words describing a story into a bunch of panels that can have words on them. Something that really helped me was focusing on what my core theme and story was. I constantly asked myself, how do these panels serve my story? How do these other elements build on top of my theme? And with that, after a couple days, I finished the storyboard. Alright, so after the storyboard, I still did not draw yet. Instead, I went to Blender and created a bunch of shitty 3D models for myself. And the reason is because it saves me a lot of time. 3D models are really important reference to me because it gives me information on form, perspective, lighting, and most importantly, context. While the storyboard gives me a rough idea of what the composition is, physically building it out gives me so much perspective, pun intended, and the ability to make micro changes to the camera lets me be flexible. So once I had all the shots built up in 3D, that's when I finally started drawing. Now, at this point, I had no idea what I actually wanted the manga to look like. I know for sure I wanted to be black and white, kind of have like a scribbly, sketchy feeling to it, but I didn't know what the specific technique would be. However, once I finished this specific page, something clicked in my head and I knew this was how I wanted the rest of the manga to look. So with the visuals figured out, I nailed down my process. It was storyboard, 3D model, rough line art, clean line art, lassoing in my shapes, adding textures, and finally some white highlights on top. And with all that out of the way, I just had to stay consistent, and lock in. Alright, before I show you the manga, I had a few things I wanted to add. First is that I drew this in Procreate, and as amazing as iPads are, mine got really laggy because of the file size. So for the future, I would definitely separate projects like this into different files. Second is that Procreate, from my knowledge, doesn't have a robust grid system. I know in Clip Studio Paint, they'll just make the panels for you and it's pixel perfect. But in Procreate, I drew all the panels by hand, and it's kind of gross, especially as a design student. The spacing and the margins are all very inconsistent, so it's something I'll have to solve for the future. But enough about that, you probably want to see the manga now, so here it is. Please enjoy Abscissa.